For most of human history, death was assumed to be a moment, a threshold, a line you cross from one side to the other. The heart stopped, the breath stopped, the person was gone. Whatever had animated the body departed in an instant, and what remained was no longer them in any meaningful sense. The science of what actually happens in the minutes and seconds around death tells a different story, a stranger one that has forced medicine to reconsider where death actually occurs, what the dying brain is capable of, and whether the boundary between living and not living is as clear as 2,000 years of human assumption suggested it was. In the last decade, researchers have documented something that happens in the brain immediately after cardiac arrest that nobody predicted and that nobody has yet fully explained. The activity does not stop, it surges. In 2013, a team of researchers at the University of Michigan, led by neuroscientist Borjigin, published a study that produced results so unexpected that the team initially suspected instrumentation error. They had been monitoring the brain activity of rats during cardiac arrest, measuring the electrical signals produced by the cortex using electroencephalography. When the heart stopped, they expected the brain signal to decline and fade. What they recorded instead was a surge of highly organized, high-frequency brain activity in the seconds immediately following cardiac arrest, activity that was, by the measures they were using, more coherent and more intense than anything recorded during normal waking consciousness. The rats were clinically dead. Their hearts had stopped, blood had ceased flowing to the brain, and their brains were producing the most organized electrical activity of their measured lives. The team replicated the finding. Then they looked more carefully at what kind of activity they were seeing. The signals showed the neural signatures of a brain in a state of heightened consciousness, specifically the kind of high-frequency gamma wave activity that in living, conscious animals is associated with the integration of sensory information, the formation of vivid perceptual experiences, and what researchers describe as the binding of information across different brain regions into a unified conscious experience. The dying brain was not shutting down. It was, in the moments after cardiac arrest, doing something that looked neurologically like the most intense conscious experience the animal had ever had. In 2023, Borjigin's team published a follow-up study that found the same surge in human patients. 4 patients who were in a coma and on life support had their brain activity monitored continuously. In 2 of the 4 patients, when life support was withdrawn and the heart stopped, the same surge of gamma wave activity appeared, localized specifically to the regions of the brain associated with conscious experience. The surge lasted for up to 30 seconds after cardiac arrest, before the signal finally degraded. 30 seconds of the most intense, most organized brain activity ever recorded in those patients, occurring after their hearts had stopped beating. This finding sits alongside a much larger and older body of research that medicine has spent decades struggling to categorize: the near-death experience. The phenomenon reported by somewhere between 10 and 20% of people who are resuscitated after cardiac arrest, the experience of moving through darkness toward light, the life review, the rapid, vivid, emotionally intense replaying of significant memories, sometimes described as occurring in a single compressed moment that contains years of experience, the sensation of leaving the body and observing it from above, the encounter with deceased relatives, the feeling of profound peace, of being welcomed, of understanding something that cannot be put into words on return. These reports have been documented across cultures, across centuries, across languages and religious traditions, and complete absence of religious belief. They are reported by children too young to have cultural expectations about what death should look like. They are reported by people who were blind from birth and who, during their near-death experience, describe visual perceptions they could not have had in normal waking life. They are reported in enough consistent detail across enough demographically diverse populations that dismissing them as random confabulation has become increasingly difficult to do without dismissing a substantial body of carefully collected data. The standard medical explanation for near-death experiences has always been that they are produced by a dying brain in distress, that the hallucinations result from oxygen deprivation, from the release of endorphins under extreme stress, from random neural firing as the system shuts down. These mechanisms are real, and they almost certainly contribute to some of what is reported, but the brain search data complicates the explanation in a specific way, because the experiences are not reported as chaotic or random. They're reported as among the most organized, most coherent, most meaningful experiences of the person's life. And the brain, in the moments after cardiac arrest, is not showing the neural signature of random dying activity. It is showing the neural signature of organized conscious experience. The AWARE study, conducted by cardiologist Sam Parnia over more than a decade, was designed to test one specific aspect of near-death experience reports, the out-of-body component. Patients who reported leaving their bodies and observing resuscitation efforts from above sometimes described details of the resuscitation that they should not have been able to know: the positions of staff in the room, the specific actions taken, objects placed in locations not visible from the bed. Parnia placed hidden images on shelves near the ceiling in cardiac arrest bays, images that could only be seen from above. The study ran for years across multiple hospitals. The results were mixed. One verified case of accurate out-of-body perception was documented. The study did not produce the definitive confirmation its design was intended to find, but it also did not produce the definitive refutation that would have settled the question. The question remains open. Parnia continues the research. What the neuroscience has established without controversy is that the brain does not simply stop at the moment of cardiac arrest. It continues to process, to reorganize, and to produce coordinated electrical activity for a period after the heart stops. The duration of that activity, the nature of it, and what, if anything, it corresponds to in terms of subjective experience are questions that the data raises without fully answering. There is a related finding that has received less attention but that sits in the same territory. Researchers studying terminal lucidity, the phenomenon in which patients with severe dementia or other forms of cognitive impairment expectedly recover clear, coherent consciousness in the hours or days before death, have documented cases that are difficult to explain given what is known about the underlying brain damage. Patients who have not recognized family members for years suddenly become fully present, fully communicative, fully themselves. They say goodbye with clarity and intention. Then they die. The brain that was supposed to be too damaged to produce clear consciousness produces it one final time. Where this comes from, whether it represents a genuine restoration of neural function, a release of suppressed capacity, or something else entirely, is not understood. What all of this accumulates to is a picture of death that is less like a switch being turned off and more like a process, one that involves, in at least some cases, a period of intense neural activity, organized experience, and biological events that the framework of death as threshold cannot easily accommodate. The legal and medical definition of death has shifted in recent decades for this exact reason. The old definition, cessation of heartbeat and breathing, was replaced in most jurisdictions by brain death, the irreversible cessation of all brain activity, including the brainstem. This shift happened because medicine recognized that the heart stopping was not in itself the end of the brain, and that the brain stopping was not always irreversible even when the heart had stopped. The boundary kept moving as the science got more detailed. It is still moving. What you are is a biological process. What death is, it turns out, is a biological process too. Slower, stranger, and more varied than the threshold model suggested. The brain in the 30 seconds after cardiac arrest is doing something. The data shows it clearly. What that something is and what, if anything, it corresponds to from the inside is the question that the neuroscience of death has opened and not yet closed. The moment of death, which seemed for most of human history to be the simplest thing imaginable, a before and an after with nothing in between, turns out to contain something. 30 seconds of the most organized brain activity ever recorded in a dying person. 30 seconds that nobody fully understands. 30 seconds that happen in one form or another to every person who has ever lived. What they are like from the inside, if they are like anything at all, is the last thing any of us will ever find out.